You ask any sailor who spent time on the rivers back then, and they'll tell you the water has a memory. The ocean is too big, too deep. It swallows things and moves on. But the rivers hold on to everything, every bullet, every body, every drop of chemical runoff. It all settles into that thick brown silt at the bottom. And sometimes, if you stay out there long enough, if the heat and the exhaustion and the silence get to you, you start to get the feeling that the river is waiting for a chance to give some of that misery back. I'm telling you this because I need to set the record straight on what happened in Sector 4. You won't find it in the official after-action reports. If you dig up the files from late 1968, you'll see a lot of redacted lines and a final summary that blames enemy mines and mechanical failure for the loss of a PBR and her crew. That's the clean version. That's the version that lets the brass sleep at night. But it's not the truth. The truth is something that's been eating at me for 50 years, waking me up in a cold sweat whenever I hear water lapping against a dock, or the hum of a diesel engine idling too low. To understand what we found out there, you have to understand the mood in late '68. The Tet Offensive had changed everything. The rules of engagement were shifting. The enemy was everywhere and nowhere. And the Delta was a mess of paranoia and violence. I was a first-class petty officer back then, running a PBR, a patrol boat, river. We were the Brown Water Navy. Our job was to patrol the labyrinth of tributaries and canals that fed into the Mekong, checking sampans for contraband, disrupting supply lines, and generally making ourselves a target so the big boys in the choppers knew where to shoot. It was a job that required a specific kind of mindset. You had to be hyper-vigilant, but you also had to be numb. You couldn't jump at every splash in the water, or every shadow in the tree line, or you burn out in a week. I was good at it. I trusted my boat, I trusted my crew, and I trusted the radar. I didn't have time for ghost stories. But 3 weeks before we got our orders for Sector 4, something happened that cracked that armor. I wasn't there for it, but I heard the tape. We all did. In the mess hall back at the base. It was a recording from a patrol boat operating in a neighboring sector, Unit PBR 105. It was the middle of the night. Pitch black. No moon. The radio operator's voice was tight, panicked, cutting through the static. He wasn't calling out enemy fire. He wasn't calling out rockets or mortars. He was screaming about a hull breach. He kept saying, "It's got the prop. It's holding the prop." You could hear the engine screaming in the background, high-pitched and straining, like the boat was trying to tear itself free from something immovable. Then came the sound of fiberglass snapping, not shattering like it hit a mine, but crunching, slow and wet, like bone breaking under pressure. The transmission ended with the sound of rushing water and a man screaming for a light. Command wrote it off as a mine strike or a submerged log that fouled the screw. But we all knew what a mine sounded like. A mine is a thunderclap. This was struggle. It sounded like the boat was being wrestled underwater. We didn't talk about it. You didn't talk about things like that if you wanted to keep your head in the game. You just checked your own hull, greased your own props, and prayed you didn't run into whatever log PBR 105 found. Then came the orders for Sector 4. Sector 4 was a narrow tributary that branched off the main river and wound deep into the interior. On the maps, it was just another blue squiggly line. In reality, it was a choke point. Intelligence claims the VC were using it to move heavy munitions at night, bypassing the checkpoints on the wider channels. Our orders were simple. Enforce a hard blockade. Go upriver, park the boat at a strategic bend, and ensure nothing moves on that water after sunset. Total curfew. If it floats, burn it. If it moves, sink it. My crew was solid. Tex was my forward gunner. He was a kid from Oklahoma, barely 20, with eyes like a hawk and a superstitious streak a mile wide. He had a rabbit's foot zip-tied to the twin .50 calibers in the forward tub and a rosary hanging off the ammo box. He was the kind of guy who would spot a sniper in a tree line 3 clicks away, but would refuse to light 3 cigarettes on a match. Then there was Hien. Hien was our interpreter and guide, a South Vietnamese local attached to our unit. He was older, quiet, with a face that didn't give much away. He knew the river better than any map, but he didn't like Sector 4. When the briefing officer pointed it out on the wall map, Hien had gone rigid. He didn't say anything to the lieutenant, but I saw his knuckles turn white. We pushed off at dawn. The PBR is a good boat, fast, maneuverable, powered by water jets, so you don't have to worry about fouling a propeller on weeds. Or at least, that's the theory. She hummed underneath us, that deep diesel vibration that settles into your bones and stays there for days. As we moved deeper into the tributary, the world changed. The main river was busy sampans, fishing boats, other patrols. It was noisy and alive. But as soon as we crossed the threshold into Sector 4, the noise just stopped. This area had been part of a heavy defoliation campaign a few months prior. The Air Force had come through with the spray planes, dousing the jungle on both banks with experimental herbicides to deny the enemy cover. It had worked. The mangroves weren't green. They were gray, dead, skeletal branches clawed at the sky, stripped of leaves rotting in the humidity. The water hyacinths, usually a vibrant, choking green carpet, were brown and slimy, dissolving into a sludge that coated the surface of the water. The smell hit us first. It wasn't just the smell of diesel and river mud. It was a chemical tang, sharp and metallic, mixed with the sweet, cloying scent of decay. It tasted like copper on the back of your tongue. "Place smells like a grave," Tex muttered over the intercom. He was up in the forward tub, scanning the banks through his shades. He kept wiping his nose, trying to clear the smell. "Keep your eyes on the tree line, Tex," I told him, keeping my voice steady. "Watch for bunkers." We motored upriver for 3 hours. The deeper we went, the narrower the channel got. The dead trees crowded in, their roots twisting into the water like arthritic fingers. The heat was oppressive. It was a heavy, wet blanket that made the air hard to breathe. The sun beat down on the fiberglass deck, baking us alive in our flak jackets. But the strangest thing wasn't the heat or the smell, it was the silence. Usually, the delta is loud. Even when there's no shooting, there's life. Birds calling, monkeys in the canopy, insects buzzing, a constant high-pitched drone of nature. Here, there was nothing. No birds, no insects, not even the splash of a fish jumping. The water was flat and brown, like a sheet of dirty glass. Hien was standing next to me in the cockpit, scanning the banks with binoculars. He hadn't said a word in an hour. "Hien," I said, trying to break the tension. "You ever been up this stretch before?" He lowered the binoculars slowly. He didn't look at me. He looked at the water. "Not here, Captain. Whiteo is dead. Local people do not come here." "Why not?" "VC territory. VC do not come here either," he said. His voice was low, barely audible over the engine. "This place is sick. The water is sick. The land is sick. Even before the chemical rain, the people called this the throat of the snake. They say the river here is hungry." I snorted. "Well, the VC have to move their supplies somewhere. Intel says they're using this route." "Intel is wrong," Hien said simply. "Look at the mud banks, Captain. No tracks, no fishing traps, no landing spots. Nobody is here." He was right, and that bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Usually, even in the hottest zones, you see signs of life, a footprint in the mud, a discarded cigarette pack, a broken net. The banks here were pristine, smooth gray mud baking in the sun. It was like the war had forgotten this place, or was afraid to touch it. We reached our designated ambush point around 1400 hours. It was a sharp bend where the channel widened slightly, giving us a good field of fire in both directions. I cut the engines to idle and we drifted toward the bank, nosing into a cluster of dead roots to tie off. We were going to sit tight, wait for darkness, and see what came down the river. The afternoon dragged on. The heat was relentless. I sat in the coxswain's chair, staring at the instrument panel, trying to ignore the headache that was starting to throb behind my eyes. The chemical smell was getting worse, seemingly rising off the water as the sun cooked it. That's when I saw the depth sounder acting up. It was a standard piece of kit, a simple sonar pinger that told us how much water we had under the keel. In the delta, depths can change in a heartbeat. Silt, sandbars move. You live and die by that gauge because grounding a boat in a kill zone is a death sentence. We were sitting in about 20 feet of water. The needle was steady. Then, out of nowhere, it jumped. 15 feet, 10 feet, 8 feet. I sat up straight, checking our position. We hadn't moved. We were tied off to the bank. Tex, I keyed the mic. Check the lines. We drifting? Negative, skipper. Lines are tight. We're sitting still. I looked back at the gauge. 5 feet. 4 feet. Whatever was under us was massive, and it was rising. My hand hovered over the throttle. If we were drifting over a submerged log or a mud shelf, I needed to know. But the boat wasn't moving. The reading was changing because the bottom was moving. Then, just as quickly as it rose, the needle fell back. 8 feet, 12 feet, 20 feet. I tapped the glass of the gauge. Must be a glitch, I muttered to myself. Gremlins in the wiring. But I didn't believe it. I knew this boat. I knew her quirks. The electronics were solid. A depth sounder works by bouncing sound waves off a solid object. For the reading to change like that, something solid had to have moved directly underneath our hull, rising up to within 4 feet of the keel and then sinking back down. I looked over the side. The water was opaque, a swirling soup of brown mud and defoliant scum. You couldn't see an inch below the surface. Everything okay, skipper? Tex called out. Fine, I lied. Just checking the instruments. Keep your eyes open. I didn't tell them. I didn't want to spook the kid, and I definitely didn't want to validate whatever ghost stories Heen was running through his head. But for the rest of the afternoon, I couldn't take my eyes off that water. It looked heavy, thick. It didn't ripple like water should. It moved like oil. Dusk fell hard and fast, as it always does in the tropics. The sky turned a bruised purple, then black. The jungle, what was left of it, became a wall of ink. We went to full blackout conditions. No running lights, no cigarettes. Just the faint glow of the radar screen and the starlight reflecting off the river. This was the dangerous time. The curfew was in effect. Our orders were to challenge any vessel. If they didn't stop, we opened up. At 2000 hours, the radio crackled. It was Lieutenant Commander Vance, our handler back at the Tactical Operations Center. Vance was a spook, intelligence corps. I'd never met the man face to face, just knew his voice. It was dry, precise, and completely devoid of emotion. PBR 10. This is Watchtower. Sitrep, over. I keyed the handset. Watchtower. This is 10. In position, all quiet. No traffic. No movement. Over. Copy 10. Vance replied. Be advised, thermal scans from air recon show anomalies in your sector. Keep a close watch on the waterline. Report any unusual hydraulic disturbances. Over. Hydraulic disturbances? I asked, frowning. You mean wakes? Swimmers? Over. There was a pause. Just report what you see, Miller. Watchtower out. The line went dead. I looked at Hien. He was sitting on the engine cover, staring into the dark. Hydraulic disturbances, I whispered. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Hien didn't answer. He was listening to something I couldn't hear. An hour later, Tex broke the silence. Contact, he whispered over the intercom. 12 o'clock. Drifting downriver. No lights, no engine. I was on the radar instantly. Nothing on the scope. I'm not painting anything, Tex. You sure? Visual confirmation, skipper. It's small. Sampan. Drifting dead center of the channel. Range 200 meters. I grabbed my night vision starlight scope and trained it forward. The grainy green image flared, then settled. There it was. A small wooden sampan, maybe 15 feet long, drifting sideways with the current. It looked empty. No silhouette of a helmsman standing at the stern. Battle stations, I said quietly. Tex, track it. Rear gunner, watch R6. Hien, get on the loudhailer. The crew moved with practiced efficiency. The click-clack of charging handles echoed in the quiet. I eased the throttles forward, just enough to give us steerage, and we slid out from the bank to intercept. We closed the distance slowly. The sampan was drifting aimlessly, spinning slowly in the current. It was a ghost ship. Challenge them, I ordered. Hien picked up the megaphone. He spoke in Vietnamese, his voice booming over the dead water. This is the United States Navy. You are in a restricted zone. Cut your engine and prepare to be boarded. Show your hands. Silence. The sampan kept drifting. Again, I said. Hien repeated the warning. Still nothing. Warning shot, I told Tex. Put it across the bow. Wake him up. Thump, 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 the forward 50 barked. 3 tracers tearing through the dark, slashing the water 10 feet in front of the wooden boat. The sound rolled over the river, loud and jarring. Nothing happened. No movement in the boat. No return fire. No panicked fishermen jumping overboard. It's abandoned, Tex said, his voice tight. Has to be. Pull alongside, I said. We check it, standard procedure. Watch for booby traps. If you see a wire, you back off fast. I maneuvered the PBR carefully, matching the drift of the current until we were parallel with the sampan. I kept us about 10 feet off, just in case it was rigged to blow. I hit the searchlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the wooden hull. It was old, weathered teak. The bottom was filled with a few inches of water and some old netting. There was no cargo, no weapons, no bodies. It's empty, Tex said, relaxing slightly. Just some old junk. Why is it drifting? I asked. Where's the owner? Maybe fell overboard, the rear gunner suggested. Bring us in closer, I said. I want to see the registration numbers on the bow. We drifted closer until our fenders bumped the wood. Tex leaned over the rail with a boat hook to snag the gunwale. Skipper, Tex said, and his voice changed. The cocky kid was gone. Skipper, look at the hull. I see it, I said. It's old. No, Tex said. Shine the light lower. Near the waterline, look at the damage. I adjusted the spotlight beam. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. The sampan had a hole in the bottom, amidships. That explained why it was riding low, but it wasn't a bullet hole, and it wasn't rot. Wood splinters usually point in the direction of the impact. If you shoot a boat, the wood splinters inward. If a mine goes off outside, the hull shatters inward. The planks on the bottom of this sampan were shattered upward. Giant, jagged splinters of teak were sticking up into the air, reaching toward the sky like broken teeth. I stared at it, my brain trying to process the physics. For the wood to break like that, something had to hit it from underneath, but not an explosion. An explosion would have vaporized the thin wood. This looked like force. Blunt, massive force. Like a battering ram had punched straight up through the bottom of the boat. What hits a boat from the bottom like that? Tex asked, looking back at me. His face was pale in the reflection of the searchlight. A rock? No rocks in this channel, I said. It's all mud. A log? A log doesn't punch through 2 inches of teak, I said. And a log doesn't hit you hard enough to shatter the keel. Hien leaned over the rail, staring at the hole. He reached out and touched one of the splintered planks. It was wet, covered in a thick gray slime. Not a log, Hien whispered. Something came up. Something wanted to see what was inside. Stow it, Hien, I snapped, but my heart wasn't in it. I looked at the hole again. The size of the impact area was disturbing. It was about the width of a man's torso. Whatever had hit this boat had done it with precision. It had punched through the hull, found the boat empty, and let it drift. Skipper, Tex said, and he was pointing at the water around the sampan. The water. Look at the water." I looked. The surface around the drifting boat was bubbling. Not boiling, but fizzing. Tiny bubbles of gas were rising to the surface, popping with soft, hissing sounds. And with the bubbles came the smell, that rot, that chemical copper tang, but stronger now. Much stronger. "Methane," I said. "Swamp gas." We stirred up the bottom. "We're in 40 feet of water, Skipper," Tex said. We didn't stir up anything. I grabbed the throttle. Every instinct I had, every alarm bell trained into me by years of survival, was screaming at me to get away from that sampan. It felt like bait. It felt like a trap. "Cast off," I ordered. "Tex, let it go. We're moving on." Tex pushed the sampan away with the boat hook as the wooden hull drifted back into the darkness. The PBR gave a sudden, violent lurch. It wasn't a wave. It wasn't the current. It felt like something heavy had just brushed against the keel. The entire boat shuddered. Tools rattled on the deck. I grabbed the wheel to steady myself. "What was that?" the rear gunner yelled. "Did we hit?" I looked at the depth sounder. 0. The needle was buried at 0. "Contact!" Tex screamed, swinging the twin 50s down toward the water off the port bow. Something in the water, right below us. I slammed the throttles forward. The water jets roared, churning the brown sludge into a froth. The boat leaped forward, fighting the inertia. "Hold fire," I yelled. "Don't shoot unless you have a target." "What did you see?" "A wake," Tex was shouting, his voice cracking. I saw a wake, but it wasn't on top. It was under the surface. It was moving against the current. We sped away, tearing up the channel, putting distance between us and the drifting sampan. I didn't throttle back until we were half a mile upstream. My hands were shaking on the wheel. I told myself it was adrenaline. I told myself it was just a submerged log we'd clipped. But I knew better. Logs don't move against the current. Logs don't punch holes in teak boats. I looked at the depth sounder again. It was back to normal, reading 40 feet. But I couldn't stop staring at it. I realized then that Vance's warning about hydraulic disturbances hadn't been a suggestion. He knew. Whoever sent us here knew that there was something in this dead stretch of river. I looked out at the black water stretching ahead of us. It looked calm. It looked empty. But now, every time I looked at the surface, I couldn't help but wonder how thin the barrier was between us and whatever was down there. And somewhere in the darkness behind us, the sampan was still drifting, its bottom shattered by something that had risen from the deep, taken a look, and decided to wait for something bigger. Something like us. We didn't stop running until the engine temperature gauges were pinning the red. I kept the throttles hammered down, pushing the PBR through the black water, banking hard around the twisting bends of the canal until I was sure, or as sure as you can be in a place like that we had left whatever that was behind us. The roar of the water jets was the only sound in the world, a deafening, mechanical scream that drowned out the blood pounding in my ears. When I finally pulled the throttles back, the silence that rushed in was worse than the noise. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was heavy, like a physical weight pressing down on the fiberglass deck. We drifted into a small inlet about 2 miles upstream from where we'd found the sampan, nosing the bow into a tangle of dead mangrove roots just to hold us steady against the current. "Cut the engines," I said. My voice sounded wrecked, scratchy and thin. The diesels shuddered and died. The vibration stopped. For a long minute, nobody moved. We just sat there in the dark, listening to the cooling metal tick and ping, waiting for the water around us to explode. "Check the bilges," I ordered, breaking the spell. "Tex, get off the gun and check the forward compartment. See if we took on water." Hien, watch the tree line. I climbed out of the coxswain's flat and went aft to check the engine covers. I needed to move, needed to do something with my hands. I pulled the hatch and shone my red lens flashlight into the engine bay. No water. The seals were holding. But the smell coming off the hot iron wasn't just oil and diesel. It was that same copper rot stench we'd smelled on the river, baked into the very air intake of the boat. "Forward compartment is dry, Skipper," Tex called out. His voice was steady, but I could hear the tremor in it. He was trying to be the professional gunner, the cool hand, but I'd seen his face in the searchlight back there. He was rattled. We all were. "All right," I said, moving back to the radio. "Listen up. We hit a submerged obstruction. Probably a shifting sandbar or a sunken log that the current moved. That's why the depth sounder bottomed out. It happens." "It wasn't a log, Miller," Tex said. "He didn't call me skipper." He was looking out at the river, his hand white-knuckled on the receiver of the 50. I saw the wake. Logs don't leave wakes moving upstream. "Current plays tricks in these narrow channels," I said, though I didn't believe it myself. "Eddies, swirls, it can look like movement." "It was chasing us," Tex insisted. "Stow it," I snapped. I couldn't have him spiraling. Not here. Not in the dark. "We're secure. I'm calling it in." I keyed the handset for the PRC-25. Watchtower, this is PBR-10. "Sit rep, over," static hissed back at me, thick and wet. Then, Vance's voice cut through. Clear as a bell, like he was sitting in the next room and not miles away in a tactical operations center. 10, this is Watchtower. Go ahead. Watchtower. We have made contact with a derelict vessel, sampan, roughly 15 feet, no occupants, all integrity compromised. We encountered submerged debris during inspection and relocated 2 miles upstream to assess damage. Boat is operational. Requesting orders. Over. There was a long pause on the other end. I imagined Vance sitting in an air-conditioned trailer, sipping lukewarm coffee, looking at a map with a grease pencil. 10, copy on the derelict, Vance said. Did you secure the vessel? I frowned at the handset. Negative, Watchtower. We cast it off. It was drifting. We moved to avoid collision with debris. Copy, Vance said. His tone shifted. It wasn't angry, just colder. 10, that vessel is potential intelligence. You are to return to the coordinates of the encounter, locate the sampan, and secure it to the bank. Do not let it drift out of the sector. Over. I stared at the radio. Say again, Watchtower? You want us to go back? We're in a narrow channel with submerged hazards. That sampan is junk. Over. Those are your orders, Miller, Vance said. Secure the vessel. Tow it to a stable position on the mudbank and inspect it thoroughly. We need to know what happened to the crew. Maintain your blockade. Watchtower out. The radio clicked off. I slammed the handset down on the console. Son of a bitch. He wants us to go back? Tex asked. He had turned around in the tub, his eyes wide behind his shooting glasses. He wants the sampan, I said, grinning without any humor. Apparently, a busted wooden boat is vital to national security. We can't go back there, Ian said. It was the first time he'd spoken since we stopped. He was crouching near the ammo locker, holding his M16 across his knees. The water there, it is angry. You saw the hole, Captain. You saw what made it. I saw a hole, Hayne, I said, forcing myself to sound like the petty officer I was supposed to be. I didn't see a monster. We have our orders. We go back, we grab the boat, we tie it up, and we sit tight until dawn. Then we get the hell out of this sector. I fired the engines back up. They caught with a cough of black smoke, settling into a low idle. I swung the bow around, fighting the current, and pointed us back downstream, back toward the dark. It took us 20 minutes to find the sampan. It had drifted into a snag of dead trees near the eastern bank, caught in a slow, swirling eddy. When the searchlight beam hit it, it looked like a coffin floating in an open sewer. Tex, get the grappling hook, I ordered. We're not pulling alongside this time. Snag it from a distance, and we'll tow it to that mud flat over there. Tex missed with the first throw. His hands were shaking. The second throw caught the bow of the sampan with a dull thunk. He hauled the line taut, and we dragged the broken boat out of the snag. It moved sluggishly, heavy with water. We towed it to a stretch of gray mudbank about 50 yards downriver, a desolate patch of ground where the defoliant had stripped the earth down to the clay. We beached the sampan, driving its bow into the mud, and then backed the PBR off, dropping our stern anchor to hold us in the center of the channel, giving us a 30-yard standoff distance. "All right," I said, checking my watch. It was 2200 hours. "We hold station here. Tex, you're on the forward 50s. Keep the light moving, but keep it brief. Don't burn out the battery. Hien, you're on the aft M60. I'm on radar and radio. We rotate every hour." The waiting began. If you've never sat on a river in Vietnam at night, you can't understand the heat. Even after the sun goes down, the heat doesn't leave. It rises off the water, humid and thick, soaking your fatigues until they stick to your skin like a second layer of flesh. But this night was different. It wasn't just hot, it was feverish. Around midnight, the water started to change. I was watching the radar scope, looking for any blips, when I heard a soft glug-glug hiss sound coming from the side of the boat. I looked over the rail. Bubbles were rising from the depths. Large, oily bubbles the size of softballs. They would breach the surface and pop with a wet, sickly sound, releasing a gas that made my eyes water. "Methane," I whispered to myself, trying to stick to the script. Just swamp gas venting. But there was too much of it. The river around us was fizzing. The smell grew overpowering. A mix of rotten eggs, diesel fuel, and that sweet, metallic chemical scent. It made me gag. I pulled my shirt up over my nose, but it didn't help. "Skipper," Tex whispered over the intercom. "You see that?" "I see the bubbles, Tex. Not the bubbles, under them." I grabbed the starlight scope and moved to the forward cockpit. Tex was pointing at the water about 20 yards off the starboard beam, right near where the sampan was beached. "Watch," he hissed. I stared through the green haze of the night vision. The water was churning with the gas release, but then I saw it. A shape. It wasn't a distinct form. It was a displacement. Something massive was moving just below the surface, pushing a bow wave of mud and slime ahead of it. It moved with a terrifying fluidity. No splashing, no thrashing fins. Just a smooth, undulating motion, like a snake the size of a telephone pole. "Is that a croc?" Tex asked. "Too fast," I said. "And too big. Maybe a python? A really big one?" "Pythons don't swim like that," Hien said from the back. He had moved up to the cockpit, abandoning his post. His face was grim. "That is the Guardian. But it is wrong. The poison rain has made it crazy." "It's not a spirit, Hien," I muttered, tracking the shape as it disappeared under the PBR's hull. "It's an animal. A big, ugly animal." The boat shuddered, just a little. A subtle vibration that traveled up through the keel and into the soles of my boots. It felt like something had rubbed its back against the bottom of the boat, testing the fiberglass. I looked at the depth sounder. The needle was flickering. 20 feet, 18, 20. It wasn't the hard 0 reading from before, but it was erratic. "Vance lied," I said, the realization hitting me cold. He knows what's out here. That's why he wanted us to stay. We're not guarding the river. We're bait. "Bait for what?" Tex asked, his voice rising an octave. "For that," I said, pointing at the water. At 0200, the river exploded. There was no warning, no ripple, no sound. Just a massive concussive impact against the hull that felt like we'd been rear-ended by a truck. The PBR is a 31-foot boat. It weighs 8 tons, fully loaded. Whatever hit us lifted the stern a full 2 feet out of the water. I was thrown from the coxswain's chair, slamming my shoulder against the radio console. The coffee mug I'd been nursing shattered against the bulkhead. Tex screamed as he was tossed around in the forward tub, banging his helmet against the gun shield. The engine RPMs spiked as the jets cleared the water, screaming in the air for a split second before the boat slammed back down with a bone-jarring crash. "Contact!" I roared, scrambling to my feet, ignoring the pain in my shoulder. "Contact! All stations, free fire. Shoot the water, shoot the damn water. Where is it? Where is it?" Tex was yelling, spinning the twin 50s wildly. "Everywhere. Just shoot. I grabbed the throttle and slammed it forward, but the engine sputtered and coughed. The impact had knocked something loose, where the fuel intake had gulped air. We were dead in the water. Engine failure, I shouted. Hey N, get on the M60. Cover the stern. Then I saw it. The searchlight had been knocked askew, pointing down at a sharp angle into the water off the port quarter. In the cone of yellow light, the surface broke. It wasn't a head. It was a back. A ridge of gray, leathery flesh rose out of the muddy water like a surfacing submarine. It kept rising and rising. It was covered in thick, ropey scars, keloids from old wounds, maybe from boat propellers or shrapnel. Patches of the skin were ulcerated, weeping white fluid where the chemical burns had eaten away the flesh. It looked like a whale, but whales don't live in the Mekong, and whales don't have spines. Along the ridge of the back, sharp, bony protrusions spiked up, draped in weeds and river slime. "Jesus Christ!" Tex screamed. He opened up with the 50s. Thump, 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 thump. The heavy rounds tore into the water, stitching a line of white geysers across the surface. I saw the rounds impact the creature. They hit the gray hide with wet thwacks. Chunks of flesh blew off, exposing raw pink meat underneath. But the thing didn't dive. It didn't panic. It turned. It rolled in the water, revealing a flash of a pale underbelly. And then it sounded, driving itself down with a powerful thrust of a tail I couldn't see. The splash swamped the aft deck, soaking Hien and nearly washing him overboard. "Did you see it?" Tex was hyperventilating. "Did you see the size of that thing?" I was already on the radio. Watchtower, contact. We are under attack by unknown biologicals. Large scale, we have taken a hit to the hull. Engine is faltering. Request immediate extraction. Over." Vance's voice came back instantly. No static this time. "PBR-10. Define biologicals. Are you engaging enemy frogmen? Over." "Negative on frogmen," I screamed into the mic. "It's an animal. It's bigger than the boat. It just rammed us. We are dead in the water. Get us air support. Get us out of here." "-10, Vance said. "Maintain station. Observe and report pattern of movement. Do not leave the sector." "That is a direct order. We need data on the asset's aggression levels." "Asset?" I froze. The word hung in the air like smoke. "You know what this is. You sent us here to feed it." "Do your duty, petty officer," Vance said. "Watchtower out." I threw the handset across the cockpit. It dangled by its cord, swinging back and forth. "Skipper," Hien yelled from the stern, "the prop, the intake. It is jammed." I looked back. The engine was trying to turn over, coughing and choking, but the jet pumps weren't pushing water. We were drifting, helpless, turning slowly in the current. "Debris in the impeller," I yelled. "We have to clear it or we're sitting ducks." This was the nightmare scenario. To clear a fouled jet intake on a PBR, someone has to go to the fantail, the lowest point of the boat, inches from the water, open the inspection hatch, and reach down into the pump housing to pull out whatever is stuck. Usually, it's weeds or a fishing net. Tonight, I knew it wasn't weeds. "Cover me," I ordered. I grabbed my M16 and a machete I kept strapped to the console. "Tex, keep those guns sweeping." "Hien, watch the other side. If anything breaks the surface, you kill it." I scrambled back to the fantail. The deck was slick with river water and slime. My boots slipped, and I grabbed the railing to steady myself. I was terrified, more terrified than I had ever been in a firefight. In a firefight, you can see the enemy muzzle flashes, you can shoot back. Here, the enemy was the river itself. I knelt down by the intake hatch. The water was right there, lapping at the edge of the swim platform. It was black and churning. I could feel the vibration of something moving down there, deep in the mud. I unlatched the cover plate and threw it open. I shone my flashlight into the pump housing. It was jammed with something thick and fibrous. At first, I thought it was a tree root. I reached down with the machete to hack at it. Then the boat lurched again, hard. I was thrown forward, my chest hitting the transom. I dropped the flashlight. It rolled off the deck and splashed into the water, sinking beam down. As it sank, the light illuminated something rising up from the gloom to meet it. It wasn't a mouth, it was a hand the size of a shovel. It was pale, dead white, with 3 long multi-jointed fingers ending in black, hooked claws. Between the fingers, thick, translucent webbing pulsed. I couldn't move. I stared at it, paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of biology. It looked human, but distorted, stretched, and bloated by the toxins of the river. The hand broke the surface. It didn't splash. It reached up and gripped the metal railing of the fantail right next to my head. The metal groaned. The fiberglass of the hull creaked. The hand tightened its grip, crushing the steel rail like it was tinfoil. It wasn't attacking blindly. It was pulling the stern of the boat down, inch by inch, closer to the water, closer to whatever was attached to that arm. I looked over the edge, into the dark water where my flashlight was fading. And in the dying glow, I saw a face. It was broad and flat, with wide-set eyes that glowed with a dull, reflective luminescence like a cat's eyes, but milky with cataracts. It didn't have a nose, just 2 slit nostrils that flared open, and its mouth was a horizontal slash that seemed to wrap halfway around its head, filled with rows of needle teeth that angled backward. It was looking right at me. It wasn't an animal reacting to territory. There was an intelligence in those milky eyes, a cold, malignant curiosity. It wanted to know what was inside the metal shell. It wanted to know what I tasted like. "Tex," I screamed, scrambling backward on my hands and knees, slipping on the wet deck. "Aft! Aft! Shoot it! Shoot it off the boat!" The creature's other hand rose from the water on the port side, gripping the other rail. The stern dipped dangerously low. Water started to pour over the transom, washing around my legs. The boat was being dragged under. Tex spun the turret around. He couldn't depress the guns low enough to hit something right at the stern without shooting through the boat itself. "I can't hit it," Tex screamed. "It's too close." I fumbled for my sidearm, a .45 caliber 1911. I ripped it from the holster, racked the slide, and aimed at the pale, wet hand gripping the rail inches from my boots. I didn't think. I just squeezed the trigger. Bang, bang, bang. The heavy slugs smashed into the knuckles of the creature. Black blood thick, like oil sprayed across the white fiberglass. The creature let out a sound that I will never forget. It wasn't a roar. It was a high-pitched, vibrating thrum that resonated through the hull and into my teeth. It sounded like a sonar ping from hell. The hand released the rail. The boat snapped back up, rocking violently. I crawled forward, gasping for air, staring at the black water where the thing had been. "Is it gone?" Ian asked, his voice trembling. He was standing over me, his rifle pointed at the wake. "No," I wheezed, wiping the oily blood from my face. "It's not gone. It's pissed off." I looked at the intake hatch. The root that had jammed it was gone, pulled free when the creature let go. Or maybe it had been part of the creature all along. "Try the engine," I yelled at Tex. "Now, before it comes back." Tex scrambled into the cockpit and hit the starter. The starter motor whined, "Ree-ree-ree," but the diesel didn't catch. "Come on," I prayed. "Come on, you piece of junk." Ree-ree-ree. Silence. Then, from the water all around us, the sound started. Thrum, drum, drum. It was a rhythmic, pulsing vibration, low frequency. It shook the rivets in the hull. It shook the water droplets on the railing. "What is that?" Tex whispered. "It's calling." Hen said softly. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw total resignation in his eyes. "It is calling the others." The thrumming got louder, and then, from the darkness of the tree line on the mud bank where we had beached the sampan, I heard something else. A wet, slapping sound, like wet meat hitting mud. Slap, drag, slap, drag. Something was pulling itself out of the water and onto the land. Something that had decided that if it couldn't sink the boat, it would come aboard and take us apart piece by piece. I grabbed the machete again, my hand shaking so bad I almost dropped it. "Reload," I told them. "Everything you've got. They're coming on board." We stayed like that for what felt like an hour. Though my watch said it was only 5 minutes, I was crouched behind the radio console, my knuckles white on the handle of the machete, waiting for the first gray, scarred head to appear over the gunwale. Tex was sweeping the forward 50s back and forth, the barrels hissing from the heat of the last burst, scanning the darkness of the mudbank. Hen was prone on the aft deck, the M60 bipod rested on the engine cover, aiming into the black void where the creature had dragged itself ashore. Slap, drag. Slap, drag. The sound was wet and heavy, like a sack of wet cement being pulled over sticky clay. It was moving parallel to the boat, just inside the tree line where the mangroves were thickest. It wasn't charging. It was pacing. "I can't see it," Tex whispered, his voice tight with that specific kind of panic that comes when your training stops providing answers. "I can hear it, Skipper, but the thermal is useless. The whole bank is hot from the sun. It just looks like gray noise." "Hold your fire," I said, keeping my voice low. "Don't shoot at shadows. We need the ammo." I realized then that the creature wasn't attacking blindly. A crocodile or a shark attacks out of hunger or territorial aggression. They strike, and if they miss, they reset. That this thing had tested the hull. It had grabbed the rail to pull us down, and now that we had heard it, it had retreated to land an environment where it knew we couldn't follow, but from where it could watch us. It was assessing our defenses. It was problem-solving. The dragging sound stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. The jungle, usually screaming with insects, was dead quiet. The only sound was the water lapping against the fiberglass hull and the ragged breathing of my crew. "Is it gone?" Hien asked from the stern. "No," I said. "It's waiting." I stood up slowly, keeping my head below the armor plate of the cockpit. My legs felt like jelly. The adrenaline dump was wearing off, leaving me shaking and nauseous. I looked at the fantail. The steel railing was twisted like a paperclip. The metal sheared and bright where the paint had flaked off, and smeared across the white fiberglass deck was the blood. It wasn't red. It was a thick, viscous black sludge, iridescent under the red tactical lights. It smelled like burning tires and ozone. "Tex," I said, trying to snap us back to procedure. "Keep watching that bank. If a leaf moves, you light it up. Hien, stay on the stern. I'm going to try and clear the intake." "Skipper, you can't go back there," Tex hissed. "That thing is right there." "If we don't get the engine running, we're dead anyway," I said. "We're drifting. If the current pushes us into the bank, we're in its living room." I holstered the 4.5 and grabbed a pry bar from the toolkit. I moved aft, stepping over the smear of black blood. The heat coming off the engine cover was intense, but it was nothing compared to the chill running down my spine. I forced myself to kneel by the intake hatch again, right where that hand had been moments before. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the latch. I opened the inspection port. The water inside the housing was calm now, black and oily. I reached down with the pry bar, feeling around the impeller blades. It was clear. Whatever had jammed it, the roots, the debris, or maybe the creature's own webbing, was gone. The creature had pulled it free when it let go of the boat. "It's clear," I said, exhaling a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Tex, try the starter, gently." Tex scrambled back to the helm. He hit the button. Ree. The starter motor whined, high and desperate. The diesel engine turned over, chugging heavily, but it didn't catch. Again, I ordered. Ree, clunk. Nothing. "Fuel pressure is 0, Tex said, tapping the gauge. "The impact must have severed a line or cracked the pump. We're not getting juice to the injectors." I slammed my hand against the fiberglass. Fix it. Get the toolbox. Trace the line from the tank. We are not dying in this ditch. While Tex opened the engine access panel and started swearing at the fuel lines, I moved back to the coxswain's flat. I needed to think. I needed to understand what we were fighting. I picked up the logbook that had fallen on the deck during the collision. It was a standard-issue Navy log, bound in green canvas, belonging to the previous crew of this PBR, Unit 105, the boat whose recording we had heard 3 weeks ago. I flipped it open under the red map light. The pages were swollen with humidity, the ink bleeding in places. The early entries were standard: fuel consumption, patrol coordinates, contact reports with local fishermen. But as I turned the pages toward the end of their tour, the handwriting changed. It became jagged, hurried. November 12th. No movement in Sector 4. Silence is unnatural. Crew reporting headaches. Smell of chemical agent persistent. November 14th. Something rubbing against the hull at night. Sonar useless. Vance says stay put. Says we are gathering vital data. What data? November 16th. They aren't fish. Saw one breach near the mangroves. Too big. Too many limbs. Hien says we need to leave. He says the water is poison. I turned to the last entry. It wasn't written. It was a sketch. The previous captain had drawn a crude map of the sector we were currently drifting in. He had circled the bend in the river where the chemical defoliant was thickest. The exact spot where we had found the sampan. Scrawled across the map in heavy, dark pencil strokes, almost tearing the paper, were 2 words: feeding ground. And below that, a single sentence: they are changing. I closed the book. My hands were cold. The previous crew hadn't just hit a mine. They had been watched. They had been studied. And just like us, they had been ordered to stay. Hien, I called out softly. The interpreter looked up from his position at the stern. In the red light, his face looked old, the lines around his eyes deep with exhaustion. You knew, I said. It wasn't a question. You knew what was in here. Hien shook his head slowly. I knew the stories, Captain. The old stories. Before the war, before the French, the people here believed in the Bagiai. The river guardians, they were spirits of the water, protectors of the fish. They were benign. You leave them an offering of rice, they leave your nets alone. He gestured to the black water. But this is not Bagiai. The Americans came with the Silver Plains. You dropped the fire that eats the jungle. You dropped the poison that kills the leaves. It went into the water. It went into the mud. He looked at the smear of black blood on the deck. The poison changed them. It made them sick. It made them grow. It made them hate. They are not spirits anymore, Captain. They are cancer. Living cancer. Why didn't you tell us? Would you have believed me? Hien asked. Would the man on the radio have believed me? No. You would have called me a superstitious peasant. You Americans, you think you can shoot the world into doing what you want, but you cannot shoot the river. He was right. I wouldn't have believed him. I would have laughed. Skipper, Tex called from the engine bay. I found the leak. The fuel line to the primary injector is cracked. I can patch it with tape and wire, but it's gonna take time. Maybe 20 minutes. You have 10, I said. Work fast. I grabbed the radio handset again. The anger that had been simmering in my gut since the attack flared into a white-hot rage. I looked at the frequency dial. We were on the tactical net, the channel for communicating with Vance and the TOC. But if Vance was hanging us out to dry, talking to him wouldn't help. I needed to know what was really happening. I switched the frequency to the upper band, the air-ground coordination net. It was a long shot. Usually, it was just chatter between pilots and forward air controllers. I pressed the handset to my ear and listened to the static. Hiss, pop, crackle. Bird Dog 29er, this is Highball. Orbit at Angels 3. Nothing moving on the main road. Just routine traffic. I was about to switch back when a new voice cut in. It was faint, distorted by distance. but the call sign froze my blood. Watchtower. This is eye in the sky. We are holding pattern over Sector 4. Infrared shows significant thermal bloom at the target coordinates. Asset reaction is confirmed. Aggression levels are spiking. It was a surveillance aircraft. High altitude. They were watching us. Vance's voice replied, clear and cold. Copy, eye in the sky. Maintain orbit. Do not engage. We need to see if the subject vessel can withstand a sustained assault. The biologicals are responding to the engine frequency. It's a perfect test bed. Subject vessel. That was us. We weren't a patrol boat. We were a guinea pig. Watchtower, the pilot asked, sounding hesitant. The crew, they're taking heavy damage down there. Should we drop flares? Give them some light? Negative, Vance said. Flares will scatter the assets. We need them to commit. If the boat sinks, we'll recover the black box later. The data on the creature's lethality is the priority. Watchtower out. I lowered the handset. I didn't slam it down this time. I placed it gently on the console. The clarity of the betrayal was almost calming. We weren't just expendable. We were already written off. They knew the engine noise attracted these things. They sent us here, told us to idle in the middle of the nest, and waited to see how long it would take for the monsters to crack the shell. The hydraulic disturbances warning wasn't to save us. It was to make sure we were looking in the right direction, so we could report the details before we died. Captain? Hien was watching me. He saw the look on my face. They aren't coming, I said quietly. Nobody is coming. A sound from the bank made us all jump. Crack. A heavy branch snapped in the darkness, close to the water's edge. Then a splash. Not a chaotic splash, but a controlled entry. Something heavy sliding back into the river. It's back in the water. Tex whispered from the engine bay. I heard it. Keep working, I hissed. Don't stop. I grabbed the searchlight handle, but I didn't turn it on. If they were attracted to the boat, light might just be a target. I switched to the starlight scope again. The river was calm. Too calm. But then I felt it. It started as a vibration in my boots, vibrating up through the aluminum deck plates. A low-frequency hum that rattled the loose tools on the console. Thrum. 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 It was the same sound the creature had made when I shot it, but deeper. Resonant. It wasn't coming from one point. It felt like it was coming from the water itself, surrounding us. Is that the engine? Hien asked, his eyes wide. No, Tex said, his voice trembling. Engine is dead. That's outside. The thrumming grew louder. It wasn't just a noise. It was a physical pressure. It pressed against my eardrums, making my head swim. The water around the boat began to ripple in concentric rings, reacting to the sound waves. Thrum, thrum, thrum. It's a signal, I realized, remembering the logbook. They are changing. It's not just calling for help. It's coordinating. I looked at the sonar screen. It had been clear a moment ago. Now, a single blip appeared at the edge of the range, about 50 meters downstream, then another, to the west, then two more, upstream. They were surrounding us. Tex, how much longer? I yelled, abandoning the whisper. Almost got it, Tex shouted back. Just taping the line. Give me a minute. We don't have a minute. The PBR lurched. This time, it wasn't a hit, it was a nudge. Something bumped the bow, gentle but firm, testing the weight. Then something bumped the starboard side, then the port. They were swimming circles around us, brushing against the hull, tightening the noose. They're hurting us, Hien said. He raised his M60, aiming blindly into the dark water. They are cutting off the escape. I grabbed the flare gun from the emergency kit. Vance had said no flares. To hell with Vance. Cover your eyes, I shouted. I pointed the flare pistol straight up and pulled the trigger. Pop whoosh. The magnesium flare rocketed into the sky, bursting into a brilliant blinding white star that hung under a small parachute. The sudden light turned the night into a stark, high-contrast monochrome. The shadows on the river vanished, and we saw them. The water around the boat was boiling with shapes. There wasn't just one. There were at least 5 of them. They broke the surface in rolling arches, gray, scarred backs, dorsal ridges spiked with bone, long, powerful tails thrashing the brown water. They looked like prehistoric catfish mixed with nightmares. But the one nearest the boat was different. It had pulled itself half out of the water onto a submerged log, raising its upper body into the air. In the harsh white light of the flare, I saw it clearly for the first time. It stood, if you could call it, standing about 7 feet out of the water. Its torso was vaguely humanoid, thick with muscle and blubber, covered in weeping sores. Its arms were too long, ending in those massive webbed claws. But its head, the head swiveled toward us. The milky eyes reflected the flare light. The mouth opened, unhinging like a snake, revealing a gullet that was blacker than the night. It let out a scream, not the low thrum this time, but a wet, shrieking roar that sounded like tearing metal. Scream! The sound hit us like a shockwave. Hien clapped his hands over his ears. Tex dropped his wrench. "Start the engine!" I roared at Tex, leveling my M16 at the creature on the log. "Start it now or we die right here." Tex slammed his hand on the starter button. Re. Vroom. The diesel caught. A plume of black smoke erupted from the exhaust. The deck began to vibrate with the beautiful mechanical life of the boat. "We have power!" Tex screamed. "Get on the guns!" I yelled. "Punch it! Get us out of here!" I grabbed the throttles and slammed them forward. The water jets kicked in, churning the river. The boat leaped forward, but we didn't move. The engine roared. The RPMs redlined. The water churned white at the stern, but the boat stayed perfectly still. I looked at the speedometer. 0 knots. "We're grounded," I yelled. "We're stuck on the mud." "No, skipper," Tex yelled from the forward tub, pointing down over the bow. "We're not grounded. Look." I leaned over the console and looked. We weren't stuck on the mud. 2 of the creatures had surfaced directly in front of the boat. They had jammed their massive shoulders against the bow, digging their claws into the fiberglass. At the stern, I could feel the weight of others latching on. They were holding us. The engine screamed. The water jets blasted thousands of gallons of water per minute, enough force to move a tank, and these things were holding us in place. They were stronger than the machine. The creature on the log slid into the water and swam toward us, its milky eyes locked on me. It was the Alpha. It was coming to finish what the pack had started. "They're boarding!" Hien screamed. "Starboard side." A claw hooked over the rail. Then another. The boat began to list heavily to the right. I grabbed the radio handset one last time. "Watchtower. PBR 10. We are being overrun. Repeat, overrun. If you want your data, you better listen close, because I'm about to feed it to you." I dropped the radio and raised my rifle. The first head broke the plane of the railing, jaws snapping inches from Hien's boots. "Open fire," I screamed. "Kill them all." The twin 50s roared to life, a deafening mechanical stutter that drowned out the screams of the river. Tracers lashed out into the darkness, brilliant red streaks cutting through the magnesium-white glare of the flare. Tex was screaming, his face twisted in a rictus of pure terror, swinging the heavy guns toward the starboard rail where the first head had broken the surface. The rounds hit home. At this range, a .50 caliber bullet doesn't just make a hole, it tears meat apart. I saw the impacts slam into the creature's shoulder and neck, blowing chunks of gray, rubbery flesh into the air. Black blood sprayed across the deck, hot and smelling of ozone. The creature shrieked, a sound like grinding gears, and fell back into the water with a splash that swamped the gun tub. But for everyone we hit, 2 more were climbing. They weren't just attacking. They were swarming. They moved with a terrifying coordination, using their weight to list the boat further to starboard, bringing the gunwale down to the waterline so the others could slide aboard. "Port side! Port side!" Hien yelled from the stern. He was firing the M60 from the hip. the muzzle flash lighting up his desperate face. I spun around. Another one of them had hooked a massive clawed hand over the port rail near the engine cover. It was pulling itself up, its milky eyes fixed on me. It didn't look like an animal in a frenzy. It looked calm. It looked like a butcher walking into a freezer. I raised my M16 and fired a 3-round burst directly into its face. The bullets sparked off the bony ridge of its skull before finding the softer tissue of the eye socket. The creature flinched, its head snapping back, but it didn't let go. It shook its head like a dog shaking off water, black ichor streaming from the wound, and kept pulling. "They're armored," I shouted. "Aim for the throat, aim for the gills." The boat lurched violently as the weight shifted again. The engine was still screaming, the water jets churning uselessly against the grip of the monsters holding the bow. We were pinned, we were a floating buffet table, and the guests had arrived. "Tex, the searchlight," I yelled. "Blind them." Tex swung the light around, the beam catching another creature trying to climb over the bow directly in front of his tub. The light seemed to confuse it for a second. It hissed and shielded its eyes with a webbed hand. Tex took the opening, depressing the guns and pouring a long burst into its chest. The creature folded backward, sliding off the bow with a wet thud. For a second, the boat surged forward, free of the weight at the bow. "We're moving," Tex screamed. "Go, go, go." I grabbed the throttles, ready to push them through the firewall. But as the PBR started to gain momentum, a massive impact hammered the hull from beneath. It wasn't a collision, it was a breach. The deck plates in the coxswain's flat buckled upward. The sound of tearing fiberglass was sickening, a high-pitched screech that cut through the engine roar. Water black, oily, and reeking of chemicals, erupted through the floorboards, spraying my legs. "They're coming through the bottom," I yelled. "Bilge pumps, get the pumps on." But pumps wouldn't save us. The boat listed hard to port, the engine note changing from a roar to a gurgle as the intake sucked in air and mud. We were sinking. They weren't just boarding us, they were scuttling us. "Abandoned ship," Tex yelled, looking at the black water rising around his ankles in the forward tub. "We have to swim for the bank." "No." I grabbed his flak jacket and yanked him back. "You go in that water, you're dead in 10 seconds. Stay on the boat. Fight from the high ground." We retreated to the roof of the engine cover, the highest point on the vessel. It was a small island of metal in a rising sea of black water and gray flesh. Hien was already there, firing short, controlled bursts at anything that tried to climb the transom. He was out of ammo for the M60. He was using his sidearm now, a rusted .38 revolver. The flare overhead sputtered and died, plunging us back into darkness. "Light!" I screamed. "Tex, get another flare up." "I'm out," Tex shouted back. He was fumbling with a fresh belt for the 50, his hands slick with oil and blood. That was the last one. We were blind. The only light came from the muzzle flashes and the faint green glow of the instrument panel that was slowly slipping underwater. And then, the silence returned. The shooting stopped. The splashing stopped. The only sound was the gurgling of the sinking boat and the heavy, wet breathing of the things in the water. They had stopped attacking. "Why did they stop?" Hien whispered. He was reloading his revolver, his fingers trembling so bad he dropped a round. It clattered on the metal deck. "They know," I said, my voice hollow. "They know we're sinking. They don't have to fight us. They just have to wait for the water to reach us." I looked around. The PBR was settling by the stern. The water was already over the gunwales in the back. The forward tub was still dry, but only just. We had maybe 5 minutes of buoyancy left before the whole thing slid under the surface. Then I heard it, a low, rhythmic thumping sound coming from the darkness of the mudbank. Thump, splash, thump, splash. It wasn't the dragging sound from before. This was heavier, and it was coming closer. "Skipper," Tex whispered. "Look at the bank. 3 o'clock. I raised my rifle, squinting into the gloom. At first, I saw nothing. Then, a shape detached itself from the shadows of the mangroves. It was massive, bigger than the others. It walked on two legs, hunched over, its spine arched like a broken bow. It stood maybe 9 feet tall. In the faint starlight, its skin looked different, paler, almost translucent, pulsing with veins of dark fluid. It waded into the water, moving toward us with a slow, deliberate stride. The other creatures, the ones circling the boat, parted to let it pass. They chattered and hissed, a sound of deference. "That's the big one," I said. "That's the alpha." It stopped about 10 yards from the boat. The water was up to its chest. It stared at us with eyes that didn't reflect light. They absorbed it. They were black pits in a face that was a ruin of scar tissue and mutation. It raised a hand, not to strike, to beckon. It made a sound, a series of clicks and whistles that sounded disturbingly like language. "What is it doing?" Tex asked, his voice cracking. "It's talking," Hen said. He was staring at the creature, mesmerized. "It is telling us to come into the water." "Why?" I asked. "Because it wants us alive," Hen said. "It wants to keep us." The alpha lowered its hand and let out a roar that shook the remaining glass in the cockpit. It was a command. Immediately, the smaller creatures surged forward again, hitting the boat from all sides. "Hold them back," I yelled. Tex swung the 50 around, but the gun jammed. Click. A misfeed. "Guns down," he screamed, racking the charging handle frantically. A claw grabbed Tex's ankle. It happened so fast I almost missed it. A creature had lunged up over the side of the engine cover, snatching Tex by the leg. He screamed as he was yanked off his feet, his helmet hitting the deck with a clang. "Help me, help me." I lunged for him, grabbing the strap of his flak vest with my left hand while firing my M16 one-handed with my right. The bullets impacted the creature's arm, but it didn't let go. It had the leverage. It was heavy, and it was pulling him down into the water. "Let go of him," I roared, emptying the magazine into the thing's chest. It hissed and released its grip for a second. Tex scrambled back, kicking wildly, his boot coming off in the creature's hand. He crawled up the incline of the engine cover, gasping for air, his face gray with shock. "They're too strong," he sobbed. "We can't stop them." The boat lurched again. The water was up to the cockpit now. The radio console sizzled and sparked as the river shorted out the electronics. We were losing the last of our high ground. "We have to move," I said. "We have to get to the bank." "The bank?" Tex looked at me like I was insane. "That's where they live." "The boat is a coffin," I said. "If we stay here, we drown, or we get eaten. The bank is solid ground. We can move, we can hide." "Hide where?" Ian asked. "There is nothing but mud and poison trees." "Better than this," I said. "On my mark. We jump. We swim for the shallow water. Stay together. Don't stop for anything." I looked at the alpha. It was still watching us, waiting. It knew we had no choice. "Ready?" I asked. Tex nodded, wiping tears and snot from his face. Ian gripped his revolver with both hands. "Go." We jumped. The water was warm, like bath water, and thick with slime. I hit the surface and kicked hard, driving myself toward the mudbank. The fear of what was beneath me was a physical pain in my chest. I expected to feel claws grabbing my legs, teeth sinking into my torso. I broke the surface and gasped for air, thrashing through the waist-deep muck. "Tex." "Hien," I yelled. "Unhere," Tex shouted from my right. "Moving," Hien called from my left. We were 10 yards from the bank. The alpha roared again, and the water behind us erupted as the pack gave chase. I hit the mud. It was soft, sucking clay that grabbed my boots and tried to hold me down. I clawed my way up the bank, slipping and sliding, my fingernails digging into the rotting roots of the mangroves. I pulled myself onto solid ground and spun around, raising my empty rifle before realizing it was useless. I dropped it and drew my .45. Tex was right behind me, scrambling up the bank on all fours. But Ian was still in the water. He had tripped, or something had grabbed him. He was waist deep, struggling against an invisible weight. "Heen!" I screamed. He looked at me. His eyes were wide, but he wasn't screaming. He was calm. He raised his revolver and fired 3 shots into the water around him. Bang. 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 Then he was gone. He was pulled under violently, disappearing beneath the black surface without a splash. No struggle. No scream, just gone. No. Tex lunged toward the water, but I grabbed him by the back of his vest and hauled him back. "He's gone, Tex. He's gone. We have to help him." "Look," I pointed at the water. Where Hien had vanished, the water was churning red, and rising from the depths were 3 heads, their jaws working, tearing at something I couldn't see. Tex vomited. He fell to his knees in the mud, retching dry heaves. "Get up," I said, hauling him to his feet. "Get up, soldier. We have to move." We stumbled into the tree line. The jungle here was a nightmare of dead vegetation. The defoliant had stripped the leaves, leaving a tangled skeleton of gray branches that tore at our uniforms and skin. The ground was a slurry of mud and decaying plant matter that smelled of sulfur. We ran blindly, crashing through the brush, driven by the sounds of pursuit behind us. I could hear them coming out of the water, the heavy slap drag of their bodies on the mud, the clicking calls of the alpha directing the hunt. We ran for maybe 10 minutes before my legs gave out. I collapsed against the trunk of a dead banyan tree, my chest heaving, black spots dancing in my vision. Tex slid down beside me, clutching his M16 like a teddy bear, though he had no ammo left for it. "Did we lose them?" he wheezed. I listened. The jungle was quiet again. No birds, no insects, just the sound of our own breathing. Maybe. I lied. Maybe they stayed with the boat. I checked my .45. 2 rounds left in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. 3 shots. "Check your gear," I whispered. "What do we have?" Tex patted his vest. "Knife. Flashlight. No ammo, no radio. My boots are full of mud." "I've got the flare gun," I said, remembering the plastic pistol jammed in my belt. 1 flare left. "Great," Tex said bitterly. "We can light up the dinner table for them." We sat there in the dark, shivering despite the heat. The reality of our situation settled in. We were miles from friendly lines, alone in a sector that didn't officially exist, hunted by things that shouldn't exist. "Skipper," Tex said softly, "why'd Advance do it?" "Do what?" "Send us here." He knew. You heard him. He called us a subject vessel. Why? "Because he needed to know," I said, the anger burning in my gut again. He needed to know if these things could be weaponized, or if they were a threat to the fleet. We were just data points. Expendable. Expendable, Tex repeated. He looked at me, his young face streaked with mud and blood. "My mom thinks I'm guarding a bridge near Saigon. She thinks I'm safe." "We're going to get out of here, Tex," I said. "We head east, toward the main river." Toward the main river. At dawn, the patrols will be out. We flagged down a monitor, a swift boat, anything. "East is that way," Tex pointed into the darkness. "Right. Let's move." I tried to stand up, but a sound stopped me cold. Click, click, whistle. It came from directly above us. I looked up. In the branches of the dead banyan tree, something was perched. It was smaller than the ones in the water leaner, with longer limbs. It blended perfectly with the gray bark. Its eyes were glowing faintly in the dark. It was a scout. "Run," I whispered. The scout screeched. A high, piercing alarm call. From the jungle all around us, the answer came. A chorus of shrieks and roars. They hadn't lost us. They had flanked us. "Go, go," I yelled, pulling Tex up. We sprinted through the mud, abandoning stealth. Branches whipped my face, drawing blood. Roots tripped me, sending me sprawling into the muck, but I scrambled up and kept running. We broke through a thicket of vines and stumbled into a clearing. It wasn't a natural clearing. It was a bomb crater, old and filled with stagnant water, surrounded by a ring of shattered trees. And standing on the other side of the crater, blocking our path, was the Alpha. It stood tall, its massive chest heaving. It was holding something in its hand, something limp and wet. It tossed the object onto the mud in front of us. It was Hien's flak vest, torn in half. The Alpha roared, and from the trees around the crater, the pack emerged. There were dozens of them. They circled the rim of the crater, cutting off every exit. We were trapped. "Skipper," Tex said, his voice strangely calm, "I don't want to be eaten." He pulled his knife from its sheath. "Don't do it, Tex," I said, raising my .45. We fight. We fight until the end." "There is no end," Tex said. "Look at them. There's too many." The Alpha took a step forward. I raised the gun, aiming at its chest. I had 3 rounds. I could kill the Alpha, maybe. But the pack would tear us apart before the brass casing hit the mud. Then I remembered the radio. I remembered the intercept, biological acid reaction. Significant thermal balloon. Vance was watching. The eye in the sky was watching. They were recording this. They wanted data on lethality. I'd give them data. "Tex," I said, "do you still have that strobe light? The emergency distress strobe?" "Yeah," Tex said, tapping a pouch on his vest, "but no batteries." "Give it to me." He handed me the plastic strobe. I ripped the back off. No batteries. Useless. But inside the casing, there were wires. Copper wires. "What are you doing?" Tex asked, backing away as the Alpha took another step. "I'm changing the mission," I said. I holstered the .45 and grabbed the flare gun. I broke it open and checked the shell. It was a red distress flare. "Tex, get behind me," I ordered. "What?" "Get behind me, now." Tex moved behind my back. I faced the Alpha. It was 10 feet away now. I could smell its breath-rotten meat and old blood. I didn't aim the flare gun at the creature. I aimed it at the ground, specifically at a patch of bubbling mud near the edge of the crater water. "Methane," I whispered. "The whole damn swamp is leaking methane." I looked up at the Alpha. Its mouth opened, revealing those needle teeth. "Smile, you ugly son of a bitch," I said. I pulled the trigger. The flare hit the mud. For a split second, nothing happened. The flare sizzled in the wet clay. Then the gas pocket ignited. It wasn't an explosion like a bomb. It was a whump, a massive expanding ball of blue and orange fire that rolled outward from the crater, fueled by the pockets of methane trapped in the mud and the decaying vegetation. The shockwave knocked me backward, slamming me into Tex. We hit the ground hard. The heat was intense, stinging my eyebrows and hair. But the effect on the creatures was catastrophic. Their skins, slick with slime and chemicals, was flammable. The Alpha screamed as the fire engulfed it. It thrashed wildly, beating at the flames, but the fire clung to it like napalm. The pack scattered, shrieking in panic as the fire spread through the dry, dead brush, turning the clearing into an inferno. "Run!" I yelled, dragging Tex to his feet. "Run through the fire. It's the only way out." We sprinted through the wall of flames, coughing in the smoke, the heat blistering our skin. We broke through the ring of burning monsters and plunged back into the jungle, heading east, away from the river, away from the screaming, away from the feeding ground. We didn't look back. We just ran until the jungle thinned, until the mud turned to hard-packed dirt, until the sun began to bleed gray light into the eastern sky. We collapsed on the side of a dirt road, miles from the river. I lay on my back, staring up at the sky. High above, a silver speck circled, the reconnaissance plane, still watching, still recording. I raised my middle finger to the sky. "We made it," Tex whispered, his voice raspy with smoke. "We made it." I looked at him. He was alive, burned, muddy, traumatized, but alive. "Yeah," I said, "we made it." But as I closed my eyes, I could still hear the screaming of the burning Alpha. And underneath that, I heard the deeper sound, the thrumming. Because I knew deep down, that fire doesn't kill everything. And the river always remembers. We walked for 3 hours before the dirt road finally intersected with a larger supply route. We didn't talk. Tex was limping, his bare foot raw and bleeding, wrapped in a scrap of his shirt. I was still carrying the empty flare gun jammed in my belt, my hand resting on the grip like it was a talisman that could ward off the dawn. When the sun finally broke over the horizon, it wasn't the clean, golden light you see in movies. It was gray and sickly, filtering through the haze of smoke that was still rising from the jungle behind us. The air smelled of burning diesel and charred meat. We flagged down a passing truck, a deuce and a half carrying supplies to a fire base up north. The driver, a kid from Iowa with acne scars and a 1,000-yard stare, didn't ask questions. He took one look at us, mud-caked, burned, smelling like death, and told us to hop in the back. We rode in silence, bouncing over the potholes, staring out at the passing rice paddies. Normal life was happening out there. Farmers were walking their buffalo. Women were carrying baskets to market. It felt like watching a film reel from another planet. They didn't know. They didn't know that just a few miles away, the river was alive and hungry. We were dropped off at a forward operating base near Kanto. The MPs at the gate looked at us like we were ghosts. We had no ID, no weapons, no orders, just the rags on our backs and the story in our eyes. They put us in a holding tent and gave us water, real, cold water. I drank until my stomach cramped. Tex just sat on his cot, staring at the canvas wall, rocking back and forth. An hour later, the debriefing officer arrived. He wasn't Navy. He wasn't Army. He wore jungle fatigues, with no rank insignia and sunglasses he didn't take off inside the tent. He introduced himself as Mr. Cole. Petty Officer Miller, he said. Sitting down on a folding chair opposite me, he opened a manila folder and clicked a pen. Let's start from the beginning. Where is your boat? The boat is gone, I said. My voice sounded like gravel rattling in a tin can. Sunk in Sector 4. Hostile action. Hostile action, Cole repeated, writing it down, VC. I looked at him. I looked at the clean pressed lines of his uniform, the way his hands didn't shake. And I knew he was part of it. He was part of Watchtower, part of the eye in the sky, part of the whole sick experiment. No, I said. Not VC. You know what it was. You were watching. Cole stopped writing. He looked up over the rim of his glasses. His eyes were cold, professional, empty. We have reports of heavy enemy activity in that sector, he said smoothly. Mines. Sappers. It's a dangerous area. It sounds like you ran into a sophisticated ambush. It wasn't an ambush, I said, leaning forward. It was a feeding frenzy. We were the bait. And Hien is dead because of it. The interpreter? Cole checked his notes. We have no record of an interpreter assigned to your unit for this patrol, just you and Seaman, Texas. Standard 2-man reconnaissance. I felt the blood drain from my face. There were 3 of us. Hien was there. He guided us. He died in the water. Cole closed the folder. Trauma does strange things to the memory, Miller. You've been through a hell of an ordeal. Dehydration, shock, exposure to chemical agents. It can cause hallucinations, paranoia. He stood up. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to get a medical evaluation. Then you're going to be processed for rotation back to the States. Your tour is over. You survived a mine strike that killed your boat. You're a hero. Go home, get married, forget about the river. And Tex? I asked. Seaman, Texas, is already being transferred to a hospital in Saigon, Cole said. He's in bad shape. Shock. He needs rest. He needs to forget, too. Cole walked to the tent flap. He paused and looked back at me. One more thing, Miller. That sector. Sector 4. It's being designated a free fire zone for heavy bombardment. B-52s. Arc light strikes. Starting tomorrow, there won't be a Sector 4. Just a crater. He smiled. A thin, tight expression that didn't reach his eyes. We're cleaning up the mess. You should be happy. He left. I sat there for a long time, listening to the sounds of the base outside. Trucks, engines, shouting, the throop, throop, throop of helicopters, the sounds of the war machine grinding on. They were going to bomb it. They were going to burn the evidence, bury the bodies, and erase the map. Just like they were erasing Hien, just like they were trying to erase my memory. But they couldn't erase the sound. Thrum, thrum, thrum. I could still hear it, vibrating in the bones of my skull, the sound of the river calling. I didn't go home right away. I spent 3 weeks in a hospital in Japan, treated for burns and combat fatigue. They gave me pills to help me sleep, but I didn't take them. I needed to be awake. I needed to remember. When I finally got back to the States, I tried to find Tex. I looked up his family in Oklahoma. I called every number I could find. Finally, I got his mother on the line. She told me Tex had died in the hospital in Saigon. Complications from his burns, they said. Infection. But she also told me something else. She said the Navy had sent her a letter. It said Tex had died a hero, fighting off a VC boarding party. It said he had saved his captain's life. It was a lie. A clean, patriotic lie to cover up a dirty, monstrous truth. I hung up the phone and walked out onto my porch. It was raining, a cold gray rain that smelled of asphalt and city dust. But for a second, just a second, I smelled it again. That copper rot stench of the dead canal. I realized then that Cole was wrong. You can bomb the jungle. You can burn the mangroves. You can pave over the mud. But you can't kill what's in the water. The chemicals we dumped, the defoliants, the runoff. It didn't just create those things. It woke them up. It changed them. And water flows. Rivers connect two oceans. Years later, I started seeing the reports. Small articles in the back pages of newspapers. Fishermen disappearing in the delta. Strange carcasses washing up after typhoons. Deformed fish, and then the declassified files started coming out. Not about the monsters, those were scrubbed clean, but about the environment, about the dioxin levels, about the mutagenic properties of the agents we sprayed. I found a report from 1970, 2 years after we were there. It was a geological survey of the Mekong floor. It mentioned unexplained acoustic anomalies in deep silt deposits. Low-frequency vibrations that couldn't be geological. Thrum, thrum, thrum. They didn't die in the fire. The fire just drove them deeper. Into the main channel. Into the ocean. I'm an old man now. I live in Arizona, as far from the ocean as I can get. I don't own a boat. I don't go fishing. When it rains, I close the windows and turn up the TV. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I think about Hien. I think about what he said. They are not spirits anymore. They are cancer. Living cancer. And cancer doesn't stop. It spreads. I think about the Alpha standing in that crater, holding Haynes' vest. I think about the intelligence in those milky eyes. It wasn't just an animal protecting its territory. It was a new species, born of our war, forged in our poison. We created them, we fed them. And then we tried to bury them. But the river remembers. And one day, when the tide is right, when the water is high, and the world is looking the other way, they'll come back. They'll rise from the silt, scarred and hungry, looking for the men who made them. And this time, they won't stop at the riverbank. I keep a flare gun in my nightstand. It's stupid, I know. A plastic toy against a nightmare. But it reminds me of the fire. It reminds me that they can bleed. It reminds me that I survived. For now, because sometimes, in my dreams, I'm back on the PBR. The engine is dead, the water is black. And from the darkness below, a hand reaches up, pale, webbed, and human. and grips the rail. And I know, with a certainty that freezes my heart, that the hand is mine. That's the story. That's the truth of Sector 4. You can believe it, or you can believe the official report about mines and bad luck. It doesn't matter to me. Just do me one favor. If you ever find yourself on a quiet river at night, and the birds stop singing, and the water starts to smell like copper, don't wait to see what bubbles up. Don't check the depth sounder, just run. Run until your lungs burn. Run until you find dry land. Because the water is waiting, and it remembers everything.